The Art of War, the Essential Translation by Sun Tzu, continued. Disc 5.
Chapter 5. Potential Energy. Cao Cao. In war, rely on the potential energy of the situation. Wang Shi. This refers to the permutations of accumulated potential energy. The skillful warrior, by relying on potential energy to obtain victory, never exhausts his own strength. Translator. The word used in the title of this chapter, Shi, lies at the very heart of the art of war. I have already touched on this in my introduction. It means literally situation, and so the inherent power or dynamic of a situation or moment in time, for good or bad, the strength or weakness of a location in terms of feng shui or Chinese geomancy. But it is also used in a wide range of domains. It is the word for a sexual position as described in the Chinese sex handbooks. Chapter 2 of The Wonderful Disquisition of the Plain Girl, for example, is entitled The 9 Positions, or Shi. For the lines of force in the contours of a landscape, which reveal to the eye of the landscape painter the inner energy of the landscape at a deeper level than do its outer forms. For the inherent force of brush strokes in Chinese calligraphy. For the tendency or style of a work of literature, Chapter 30 of The Literary Mind and the Carving of Dragons is entitled Establishing a Style, or Shi. In the context of the art of war, it means the potential energy or strategic advantage within a particular configuration of space and time. Thence it comes to mean the resulting might or influence of a person or group of people, and so, in a strictly military context, quote, the power imparted to an army by the circumstances of the campaign, end quote. Lewis, writing in 1990, page 117. As the great French sinologist Marcel Granet has written in his masterful study La Pensée Chinoise, new edition, Paris, Albin Michel, 1988, page 351, quote, the various situations and conditions of time and space contain latent within themselves opportunities whose influence and power we must enable ourselves to exploit if we are to make the utmost of what fate offers us, end quote. This fragile equilibrium between action and non-action, between sensitivity to the signs of what is and the will to engage with it, expresses a fundamental dichotomy that underlies so much of early Chinese thinking about the management of human affairs in general, be they military, civil, or personal, be the philosophical standpoint Taoist, Confucian, or some other non-denominational strand in Chinese philosophy. It finds its earliest expression in that monumental repository of early Chinese thought, the Book of Changes, whose entire premise is that it is possible to see into potential changes before they occur, to grasp the subtle configurations of yin and yang, and thus attune oneself to the energy at work in the world around us. Quote, the master said, to know the pivots, the springs or mechanisms of opportunity, is divine indeed. The pivots are the first imperceptible beginning of movement, the first trace of good or bad fortune that shows itself. The superior man perceives the pivot and immediately acts. He does not wait even for a day. End quote. Lewis, page 119, quoting the great treatise from the Willem Baines version of The Changes, 1967 edition, page 342. Writing of the warlords of the chaotic warring states period in which Master Sun lived, Granet adds, they lived in a state of constant revolutionary expectancy. They were preparing themselves to occupy the seat of the Son of Heaven, that is to say, to impose a new order on civilization. And so the slightest change could mean total change, and seizing the slightest sign of change was tantamount to seizing the opportunity of bringing about total change. Page 351.
Master Sun said, managing many is the same as managing few. It is a question of division.
Du Mu, Giles. This is achieved by organizing the regimental sections and carefully delegating authority and responsibility. In this way, I only have a few men under my actual command. The first Han emperor once said to his general Han Xin, "How large an army do you think I could lead?" To which Han Xin replied, "Not more than 100,000 men, Your Majesty." "And you?" asked the emperor. "The more the better," replied Han Xin.
Fighting with many is the same as fighting with few. It is a matter of marshalling men with gongs, identifying them with flags.
When many troops are deployed and the distances between them are great, they cannot see or hear each other. With the use of gongs as a signal for retreat and flags as a signal for attack, the brave do not find themselves advancing in isolation, and the fearful do not end up retreating alone. Compare Chapter 7.
With a combination of indirect and direct, an army can hold off the enemy undefeated.
Cao Cao. Going straight out into battle is direct. Appearing from the rear is indirect. Li Chuan. Confrontation is direct. Lateral excursions are indirect. Without indirect tactics or surprise troops, victory is unattainable. Jia Lin. Face-to-face with the enemy, use direct formations, but react with indirect tactics or surprise troops on the flanks and to the fore and rear, and victory is assured. He Yan Shi. Troop configurations are infinite in their variety. They are all potentially direct and indirect. Inasmuch as the enemy comes to see our direct tactics as indirect and our indirect tactics as direct, then the direct becomes indirect and the indirect direct. When General Han Shi arrayed his men with their backs to the river, at the same time sending a surprise force around the hill, taking the Zhao standards and destroying their state, he was using both kinds of tactics, direct, backs to the river, and indirect around the hill. The same general assembled his troops outside the city of Linjin, feigning a frontal assault, and simultaneously launched a surprise attack using wooden tubs by way of Xiayang, and took the king of Wei prisoner. The frontal formation at Linjin was direct, the attack via Xiayang indirect. The combination of direct and indirect is the key to victory. Compare Historical Records, Chapter 167, History of the Former Han, Chapter 34. Sheng Yu. Different people have different ideas of the meaning of direct and indirect. Master Wei Liao said that direct tactics prized frontal attack, while indirect tactics preferred attack from the rear. This was also Cao Cao's way of thinking. Duke Li held a similar view. All of these thinkers treated direct and indirect as two separate things, failing to see how the two are interlocked, how they merge and transform into one another. Emperor Daizong of the Tang Dynasty was the only person to grasp this. Quote, "Turn an indirect maneuver into a direct one by causing the enemy to see it as direct. In this way, a frontal attack becomes indirect, and vice versa. The secret lies in utterly confusing the enemy so that he cannot fathom our intent." End quote. Giles. To put it perhaps a little more clearly, any attack or other operation is direct on which the enemy has had his attention fixed, whereas that which is indirect takes him by surprise or comes from an unexpected quarter. If the enemy perceives a movement which is meant to be indirect, it immediately becomes direct. Translator. This is the first appearance in the art of war of the pair of terms zheng and qi, direct and indirect, which are so central to Master Sun's strategic ideas. They could also be translated as orthodox and unorthodox, regular and irregular, straightforward and surprise, overt and covert. What Master Sun has in mind is the complementarity of the fixed assault and the flexible maneuver. As Brigadier General Sam Griffith puts it, pages 34 to 35, quote, "The science or art of tactics was born. The enemy, engaged by the Zheng, orthodox force, was defeated by the Qi, unorthodox, unique, rare, wonderful force or forces. The normal pattern was a holding or fixing effort by the Zheng, while Qi groups attacked the deep flanks and rear. Distraction assumed great importance, and the enemy's communications became a primary target." End quote. The French translator Jean Lévy, pages 177 to 78, like He Yanxi, illustrates the point with one of Han Xin's exploits, going on to expound the point with characteristically French brilliance and wit. Quote, "General Han Shi, by repairing the suspended mountain walkways between Changyang and Sichuan, deluded his enemy into thinking that this, normally indirect route, was the one he had chosen, and therefore into regarding it as the direct mode of operation and preparing against it. Meanwhile, General Han was in fact planning to attack the enemy via Chirnkeng, and this, otherwise perfectly normal route, now became his surprise attack. When the frontal attack is the norm, a flanking attack becomes the exception. When the flanking attack is the norm, the frontal attack becomes the exception. Both norm and exception depend on what the other party is expecting. It is on the basis of the other's expectations that one has to make decisions and surprise him with his guard down. One must always be one step ahead and guess what he is guessing about our own plans in order to turn his own calculations against him. This dialectic of the direct and the indirect brings us face to face with the infinite modalities of the paradox of the liar. Sometimes an excess of scheming can cause one to blunder, whereas the total absence of scheming is the supreme scheming. If one is scheming against an enemy who is not scheming at all, one may end up the victim of one's own cleverness, having incorrectly assumed that he was scheming. Thus, subtlety and stupidity become one. One can understand why certain generals in despair resorted to consulting the Book of Changes for their decisions." End quote. My translation.
With an understanding of weakness and strength, an army can strike like a millstone cast at an egg.
Cao Cao. By attacking that which is weakest with that which is strongest. He Yanxi. In warfare, a knowledge of the weakness and strength in the potential energy of the situation ensures victory. Zheng Yu. In assembling the troops, first be sure of the proper division of units, then perfect the banners and other forms of communication, then be clear about the direct and indirect tactics. Once these elements are discerned, then the strength and weakness of the situation will be apparent. Translator. Strictly speaking, the stone referred to is a large grindstone. Millstone seems to convey better the relative size and weight.
In warfare, engage directly, secure victory indirectly.
Cao Cao. Confront the enemy directly, attack indirectly from the flank where least expected. Zheng Yu. First engage the enemy directly, at the same time steadily developing an indirect assault, either by pounding the enemy's flanks or falling on his rear. Giles. A brilliant example of indirect tactics which decided the fortunes of a campaign was Lord Robert's night march round the Peshawar Kotal in the Second Afghan War. The Way in Its Power, Chapter 57. Rule the state directly, wage war indirectly, gain the empire through non-action.
The warrior skilled in indirect warfare is infinite as heaven and earth.
Li Chuan. In the variations and alternations of his movement and stillness.
Inexhaustible as river and sea.
Li Chuan. Infinitely flexible and mobile. Zheng Yu. Infinitely resourceful in launching indirect attacks in response to the changing situation.
He ends and begins again like sun and moon, dies and is born again like the four seasons.
Li Chuan, Du You, Zheng Lu. Sun and moon revolve through their phases. They set and rise again, wax and wane. The seasons alternate. They move through cycles of hot and cold. The infinite variations of direct and indirect are like the setting and rising of the sun and moon, like the alternations of the seasons. Sun Bin's Art of War, Chapter 31, Direct and Indirect. The fundamental pattern of heaven and earth is such that when something has reached its apogee, it goes around its cycle again. When it has waxed, it wanes. This is seen in the sun and moon. It is seen in the four seasons. War is victory through form. The changes of victory through form are as infinite as the changes of heaven and earth.
There are but 5 notes.
Li Chuan. Gong, Sheng, Ju, Zhi, Yu, the 5 notes of the old pentatonic scale.
And yet their permutations are more than can ever be heard.
Li Chuan. Played on instruments of the 8 sounds, gourd, clay, hide, wood, stone, metal, silk, and bamboo, they constitute an infinite repertoire of music.
There are but 5 colors.
Li Chuan. Blue, yellow, red, white, and black.
And yet their permutations are more than can ever be seen. There are but 5 flavors.
Li Chuan. Sour, pungent, salty, sweet, bitter.
And yet their permutations are more than can ever be tasted.
Li Chuan. This is the art of the chef. Zhang Yu. These are analogies of the infinite variations of direct and indirect.
In the dynamics of war, there are but these 2, indirect and direct. And yet their permutations are inexhaustible. They give rise to each other in a never-ending, inexhaustible circle.
Wang Shi. Indirect and direct are the key to the door in warfare, the pivotal force in gaining victory. They revolve in an inexhaustible circle. Breaking that circle means defeat. Zhang Yu. Indirect is also direct. Direct is also indirect. In their infinite permutations, they give rise to one another, like yin and yang, like a circle that has neither beginning nor end. It cannot be exhausted.
A rushing torrent carries boulders on its flood. Such is the energy of its momentum.
Du Yo. The nature of water is soft and yielding. The nature of stone is hard and heavy. And yet, water can roll great boulders downstream by virtue of the torrential flood of its momentum. Translator. The one word she takes on different shades of meaning in different sections of this chapter and of the whole work: potential energy, dynamic, momentum. All are connected.
A swooping falcon breaks the back of its prey. Such is the precision of its timing.
Giles. This seems to me to denote that instinct of self-restraint which keeps the bird from swooping on its quarry until the right moment, together with the power of judging when the right moment has arrived. Compare Du Mu's note in Chapter 1, where he quotes the historical records. A hawk must keep out of sight before it swoops. Translator. The image of the word ji, which I have here translated as timing, comes from the knots or joints in a length of bamboo, so it comes to mean a division, a juncture, notches or demarcations in time and space, the rhythm or timing necessary for a well-judged attack.
The skillful warrior's energy is devastating. His timing, taut.
Wang Shi. The warrior must seize the moment, grasp the opportunity, just as the falcon does. Giles. The analogous quality in soldiers is the highly important one of being able to reserve their fire until the very instant at which it will be most effective. When the Victory went into action at Trafalgar at hardly more than a drifting pace, she was for several minutes exposed to a storm of shot and shell before replying with a single gun. Nelson coolly waited until he was within close range, when the broadside he brought to bear worked fearful havoc on the enemy's nearest ships. That was a case of G, timing.
His energy is like a drawn crossbow, his timing like the release of a trigger.
Giles. The force, energy, is potential, being stored up in the bent crossbow until released by the finger on the trigger. Translator. The introduction of the powerful crossbow around 500 BC revolutionized Chinese warfare, and its trigger action was a potent image. The Book of Changes, Appended Judgments, makes use of the same image. Quote, "The words and acts of the sage are like the mechanism of a crossbow. Honor and shame depend on the releasing of the trigger." End quote. Compare Wilhelm Baines, page 305. In Chapter 11, page 289, Master Sun once again uses the release of the crossbow trigger to describe the sudden unleashing of an army's potential energy.
In the tumult of battle, the struggle may seem pell-mell, but there is no disorder. In the confusion of the melee, the battle array may seem topsy-turvy, but defeat is out of the question.
Mei Yao Chen. Divisions have in fact been fixed. Signals and flags have been ordained. Therefore, despite all the comings and goings, the breaking and joining of ranks, though the fighting may seem disordered, it is not so. The battle array may appear to have no front or rear. Everything may appear to be going around in circles, but there is no question of defeat. Giles. It is a little difficult to decide whether the words signifying disorder and confusion should not be taken as imperatives. Fight in disorder for the purpose of deceiving the enemy, and you will be secure against real disorder. Translator. New and Wang, writing in 1991, do indeed take the words in this sense, quote, "feign disorder and confusion in the ranks and thereby ensure victory. This is an example of using the potential energy of the situation to deceive the enemy," end quote.
Disorder is founded on order. Fear on courage. Weakness on strength.
Du mu. In other words, if you wish to feign disorder and entice your enemy into the fray, you must first achieve a high degree of order. If you wish to feign fear and lure your enemy into a trap, you must first achieve a high degree of courage. If you wish to feign weakness and lead the enemy into hubris, you must first achieve a high degree of strength.
Orderly disorder is based on careful division.
Zhang Yu. Apparent disorder masking real order is based on sound division and organization.
Courageous fear on potential energy.
Zhang Yu, Du Mu, Records of the Grand Historian, Biography of Sun Bin. Apparent fear masking real courage is founded on the potential energy of a favorable situation. The Wei general Pang Juan attacked the state of Han in 341 BC, and the Qi general Tianji went to the aid of his ally Han. Sun Bin, Cripple Sun, a descendant of Master Sun and a deadly enemy of Pang Juan, the man originally responsible for amputating his legs at the knees, said to General Tian, "The troops of those three western states, Wei, Han, and Zhao, have always been fierce and contemptuous of the men of Qi. In fact, with them, Qi has a reputation for fear and cowardice. A skillful warrior will turn the potential energy of this situation to his own advantage, march the troops of Qi into the territory of Wei, and then with each succeeding night let them make a show of a dwindling number of campfires from 100,000 to 50,000 to 20,000, thereby making it seem as if the men of Qi are deserting in droves." The Qi expeditionary force did exactly this. When General Pang Juan heard of it, he was delighted and exclaimed, "I always knew that the men of Qi were cowards and deserters." He pursued them hotly for several days. The men of Qi came to the narrow defile at Ma Ling, where Sun Bin gave orders for a tree to be inscribed with the words, "Pang Juan died beneath this tree." He then secretly stationed 10,000 of his crossbow archers on either side of the defile and instructed them to let loose their arrows at the first sign of the lighting of a torch. Sure enough, General Peng arrived that very night and, seeing the inscription on the tree, gave orders for a torch to be lit so that he could read it. In that instant, before he could finish reading the inscription, 10,000 crossbows discharged their arrows, and his force was annihilated. He himself took his own life with his sword, exclaiming, "Let the glory be Sun Bin's."
Strong weakness on troop dispositions.
Zhang Yu. The founding emperor of the Han dynasty, Liu Bang, wishing to attack the Xiongnu barbarians, sent a number of spies to report on the condition of their forces in 200 BC. The Xiongnu concealed their strongest men and their sleekest horses and paraded only their weakest soldiers and skinniest livestock. All the spies advised the emperor to attack, except for Liu Jing, who said, "When two countries fight, they usually exaggerate their strength, but our spies have seen nothing but old and infirm soldiers. This must be a ruse. They are keeping their crack troops hidden. It would be inadvisable to attack." The emperor ignored his advice, attacked, and was duly surrounded by the Xiongnu at Mount Baideng.
The warrior skilled at stirring the enemy provides a visible form, and the enemy is sure to come.
Tzu provides the outward signs of weakness. Du mu, not just weakness. What this means is, if we are strong and the enemy is weak, then we should exhibit weakness, and this will cause the enemy to come. If, on the other hand, we are weak and the enemy is strong, then we should exhibit strength, and this will cause the enemy to depart. The enemy's movements all follow ours. Translator. The Marxist strategist and scholar Guo Huaruo, 1984, page 13, quotes Chairman Mao. "We can artificially create the enemy's mistakes, just as Master Sun says, by providing a visible form. We provide a sign, form, in the east, and meantime we strike in the west. This is the stratagem, the sixth of the famous 36 stratagems, known as Cry East, Strike West." Selected Works, Volume 1, page 193.
He proffers the bait, and the enemy is sure to take it.
Mei Yao Chun. He exhibits fear, and the enemy is sure to respond. Zhang Yu. He entices the enemy with some small gain, and the enemy is sure to rise to the bait.
He causes the enemy to make a move and awaits him with full force.
Translator. François Julien, pages 164 to 65, puts this idea very well. Quote, "Profit and danger are held out to the enemy like a trap. This is the very principle of manipulation in Master Sun's thinking, and what makes it so fascinating. To manipulate the other, the enemy, is to make him want to do of his own accord and will the very thing that I want him to do and which I predict will do him harm, but which he thinks will be to his profit. He thinks he is making his own decisions, but in fact I am the one indirectly leading him on." End quote.
The skillful warrior exploits the potential energy. He does not hold his men responsible. He deploys his men to their best, but relies on the potential energy.
Du mu. He first assesses the military dynamic potential energy and then measures the human talent available to him. He uses his men according to their capabilities and does not demand perfection.
Relying on the energy, he sends his men into battle, like a man rolling logs or boulders. By their nature, on level ground, logs and boulders stay still. On steep ground, they move. Square, they halt. Round, they roll.
Tzu. He relies on their natural energy. Mei Yao Chun. Logs and boulders are heavy objects. It is their own energy that enables them to move with ease. To move them by force is difficult. For an army to fight with the natural energy of the situation and not with force is the way of nature, Ziran, the of-itself naturalness of the Tao.
Skillfully deployed soldiers are like round boulders rolling down a mighty mountainside.
Du mu. Their unstoppable descent is due to the mountain, not to the boulders themselves. The main drift of this chapter is the importance in war of relying on the energy of the situation itself, using speed and sudden attack. In this way, a great deal can be achieved with little expenditure of force. Mei Yao Chun. When round boulders are on the mountainside, their energy is great. 1 man can push them downhill, and 1,000 would be unable to check their descent. Wang Shi. The boulders cannot roll of their own accord. It is the potential energy of the mountain that makes them unstoppable. Shang Yu. Likewise, it is potential energy that makes an army victorious. According to Li Jing, and also the Book of Master Huinan, there are 3 kinds of potential energy in warfare. The first is when a general despises the enemy and his officers love to fight, when ambition soars into the clouds and spirits blow like the wind. This is the energy of enthusiasm. The second is when one side finds itself in a narrow defile between mountains, where paths wind and narrow openings abound, where 1 man can hold the place and 1,000 cannot pass through. This is the energy of terrain. The third is when the enemy is lax, weary, hungry, and thirsty, when his forward camp is not yet pitched and his rear van has not yet crossed the river. If one takes advantage of this situation, this is strategic energy. Thus, to send men into battle relying on potential energy is like letting a round ball roll down a steep slope. The slightest exertion of force can have huge results.
These are all matters of potential energy.
Chapter 6. Empty and Full. Li Chuan. The skillful warrior turns the empty into the full. Du Mu. In war, avoid the full and strong. Attack the empty and weak. But first of all, know your own and the enemy's empty and full points, limitations and strengths. Niu and Wang. Empty means fearful, weak, disorderly, hungry, exhausted, few, unprepared. Full means brave, strong, well-ordered, well-nourished, relaxed, many, prepared. Wu Julong. Empty means hollow, as when military might is dispersed and vulnerable. Full means solid, as when military might is concentrated and strong. Empty and full are opposites, and yet they evolve into each other as part of an ongoing process. This chapter explains how, through an understanding and mastery of the relationship between empty and full, the warrior can seize the initiative in the struggle. He stirs and is not stirred. Translator. In Chinese medicine, full, Shi, refers to the yang state of energy abundance or repletio, while empty, Shu, refers to the yin state of energy exhaustion or inanitus. See Manfred Porkert, Chinese Medicine, New York, 1982, page 71. Guo Huaruo summarizes the drift of this chapter, 1984, page 130. Quote, avoiding the full and attacking the empty is a key principle in Master Sun's strategic thinking. He expounds the importance of taking the initiative and of avoiding passivity, of creating the enemy's weakness and of forcing or enticing the enemy troops to disperse and exhaust themselves, while our own troops concentrate their might. Thus we counter exhaustion with a relaxed ease, and as soon as we detect a weak point in the enemy, we respond swiftly and seize the moment to attack while he is unprepared. We gain the victory by adapting our actions to those of the enemy." End quote.
Master Sun said, "First on the battlefield waits for the enemy, fresh."
Jia Lin. He occupies a winning position and waits for the enemy. He is well prepared. His men and horses are relaxed and fresh.
Last on the battlefield charges into the fray exhausted.
Jia Lin. If, on the other hand, the enemy occupies an advantageous position, then I should not advance, but should withdraw my troops, seeming not to wish to confront the enemy. He will assume that I have no strategy and will surely attack, and so I end up exhausting the enemy, and not myself.
The skillful warrior stirs and is not stirred.
Du mu. I stir my enemy to move toward me, while I myself nurture my strength and wait for him. I do not go toward him for fear of exhausting myself. Zhang Yu. I stir my enemy into combat, and he is empty. I do not engage in combat and remain full. This is the art of empty and full, mine and the enemy's.
He lures his enemy into coming or obstructs him from coming.
Du yo. Go where he is bound to go. Attack where he is bound to defend. Defend the crucial passes and passages, and he will not be able to get through. As Master Wang said, a single cat guards the hole, and 10,000 rats dare not come out. A single tiger guards the ford, and 10,000 deer dare not cross. Translator. Master Wang seems to have been rather fond of the cat as tactician. See Du Yo's comment toward the end of Chapter 1.
Exhaust a fresh enemy.
Cao Cao. Harass him.
Starve a well-fed enemy.
Cao Cao. Cut off his supplies.
Unsettle a settled enemy.
Cao Cao. Attack what he holds dear. Go where he must go, and he will have to come to the rescue.
Appear at the place to which he must hasten. Hasten to the place where he least expects you.
Records of the Grand Historian, Chapter 65. The state of Wei attacked the state of Zhao in 354 BC and laid siege to its capital, Handan. Zhao, hard-pressed, begged for help from the state of Qi. The king of Qi wished to put Sun Bin in command of his troops, but Sun Bin refused in view of the physical mutilation, amputation to the knee, he had recently been subjected to. Instead, Jianji was placed in command, with Sun Bin as his strategic advisor, traveling in a curtained carriage covered with a canopy within which he contemplated his strategies. Jianji was for going straight to the relief of the besieged city of Handan, but Sun Bin argued with him that just as one does not disentangle a tangled skein of silk by hitting it, so one should not go to the aid of a party embroiled in a fight by joining in the free-for-all oneself. A better course of action would be to avoid obstacles and instead exploit the empty points of weakness. That way, the tangle would untangle itself. Now, since Wei was at war with Zhao, its crack troops had been dispatched beyond its own frontiers, and only the old and the frail had been left behind at home. The smartest move would therefore be to march on the Wei capital at Daliang and cut their lines of communication. The Wei army would then be forced to leave Zhao and come to the rescue of its own threatened territory. In one move, not only would the siege of Handan have been lifted, but a severe blow would have been dealt to Wei itself. Jianji followed this plan, and the Wei army withdrew from the siege of Handan. They fought the troops of Zhao at Juling and suffered a crushing defeat. This stratagem of avoiding the besieged Zhao capital at Handan, and instead attacking the empty, the undefended Wei capital at Daliang, is the second of the 36 stratagems, attacking Wei to save Zhao.
March hundreds of miles without tiring by traveling where no enemy is.
Cao Cao. Set out in the void. Attack emptiness. Avoid that which is defended. Attack where you are not expected.
Be sure of victory by attacking the undefended.
Wang Shi. Attack an empty, weak point, one where the general is incompetent or the soldiers ineffectual, where the fortifications are not strong or the precautions not strict, where relief will come too late or provisions are too scanty, or where the defenders are at variance among themselves. Zheng Yu. He who is skilled in attack dashes forth from the topmost heights of the ninefold heaven, see Chapter 4, making it impossible for the enemy to guard against him. The places to attack are precisely those that the enemy cannot defend.
Be sure of defense by defending the unattacked.
Zhang Yu. He who is skilled in defense hides below the ninefold earth, making it impossible for the enemy to estimate his whereabouts. In this way, the places that I shall hold are precisely those that the enemy cannot attack.
The skillful warrior attacks so that the enemy cannot defend. He defends so that the enemy cannot attack.
Wang Shi. The skillful attacker waits for the enemy to exhibit a sign of vulnerability and then attacks with all speed. In this way, the enemy cannot defend. The skillful defender ensures that he is never vulnerable. In this way, the enemy can never attack. Giles. An aphorism which puts the whole art of war into a nutshell. Translator. Wu Julung, page 88 to 89, paraphrases, quote, "The skillful attacking force succeeds by making it impossible for the enemy to know where to defend. The skillful defending force succeeds by making it impossible for the enemy to know where to attack." End quote.
O subtlety of subtleties, without form! O mystery of mysteries, without sound! He is master of his enemy's fate.
Wang Shi. Subtle and inscrutable, so he cannot be seen, mysterious and swift, so that no response is possible. That is how he can control the enemy's fate. He Yan Shi. Master Sun's method of empty and full is indeed subtle and mysterious, and its results are exceedingly great. We cause the enemy to see our strength as weakness and our weakness as strength. We in our turn are able to convert the enemy's strength into weakness, and as for the enemy's weakness, we know it for what it is. So the enemy is not aware of our weakness and strength, but we are aware of his. If we wish to attack him, we know that the place he is defending must be a place of strength, and that the place he is not defending is weak. We can then avoid his strong point and attack him where he is frailest. We can go for his throat. We can home in on his most vulnerable point. Thus, when we do attack, he does not know where to defend, and when we defend, he does not know where to attack. All the prodigious permutations of attack and defense arise from this method of empty and full. The skillful warrior is adept at these permutations and can penetrate into the inner recesses of this most subtle of mysteries. Zhang Yu. The techniques of attack and defense are subtle and ingenious. They are mysterious and secret. They are not outwardly visible or audible. It is through them that we can become the masters of our enemy's fate, of his life or death.
He advances irresistibly, attacking emptiness.
Translator. Like Kuk Ding in the Book of Master Zhuang, Chapter 3, The Secret of Caring for Life, what I care about is the way, which is more advanced than mere skill. When I first began cutting up oxen, what I saw was the whole ox. After 3 years, I no longer saw the whole ox, and now I approach it with my spirit and don't see it with my eyes. My senses have stopped, and my spirit moves at will. I follow the pattern of nature. I strike in the big hollows. I glide my knife through the big joints and go with the nature of the ox. Compare Watson, pages 50 to 51.
He retreats, eluding pursuit, too swift to be overtaken.
Zhang Yu. He comes like the wind. He goes like lightning.
If I wish to engage, then the enemy, for all his high ramparts and deep moat, cannot avoid the engagement. I attack that which he is obliged to rescue.
Du Mu. Suppose the enemy has invaded my territory. I can cut his supplies and occupy the roads by which he will have to return. If, on the other hand, I am the invader, I may direct my attack against the sovereign himself.
If I do not wish to engage, I can hold my ground with nothing more than a line drawn around it.
Jia Lin. Even though I have constructed neither wall nor ditch.
The enemy cannot engage me in combat. I distract him in a different direction.
Li Chuan. puzzle him by strange and unusual dispositions, and so make it impossible for him to engage in battle. In the Han Dynasty, 144 BC, General Li Zhuang, finding his force of 100 cavalry threatened by several thousand Xiongnu horsemen, instead of fleeing, ordered his men to dismount, undo their saddles, turn loose their horses, and lie down on the ground, thereby causing the Xiongnu to suspect an ambush, and enabling his own men to return home safely. Du Mu Xiangyu. The great general and strategist Zhu Zhiliang, the sleeping dragon, see introduction, when encamped at Yangping, ordered Wei Yan and other commanders of his to proceed together eastward, while he kept a small force of 10,000 men to defend the city. The opposing general, Sima Yi, observed that Zhu Zhiliang had few troops in the city and that his generals and officers seemed to have lost heart. In point of fact, Zhu's spirits were high. He deliberately ordered his troops to lay down their banners and silence their drums, and he forbade them to go out. Then he threw open the 4 gates of the city and set men to sweeping and sprinkling the streets. General Sima suspected an ambush and drew off his army to the northern hills. Subsequently, when he learned the truth of what had happened, he felt extremely bitter about it. This is the famous stratagem of the empty city, the 32nd in the 36 stratagems, where it is classified as a stratagem for use in a desperate situation, a deliberate and crafty exploitation of one's own weakness to outwit the enemy. The veracity of the story has been questioned by historians, but it has always been popular with Chinese novelists and dramatists. As it is told in Chapter 95 of the Ming Dynasty novel The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the wily Zhu Zhiliang is calmly playing his lute on the battlements, in full view of the enemy, a smile on his face, incense burning, with no one except 2 page boys in attendance. Giles. What Master Sun is advocating here is nothing more or less than the timely use of bluff. He would doubtless have been an excellent poker player.
His form is visible, but I am formless. I am concentrated. He is divided.
Zhang Yu. If the enemy's forms, dispositions, are visible, we can attack as one body. Whereas, so long as our own forms, dispositions are kept secret, the enemy will be obliged to divide his forces in order to guard against attack from every quarter. Translator. Any disposition, form, is per se a handicap. It bogs you down through loss of dynamism. It concretizes and so reduces possibilities. By acquiring a form, the enemy becomes numb, while I, by remaining formless, also remain alert and flexible. The enemy is caught downhill of reality. I remain uphill of it, and am able to manipulate the situation to my advantage. See Julienne, page 168.
I am concentrated into 1. He is divided into 10. I am 10 to his 1, many against his few. Attack few with many, and my opponent will be weak.
Du Mu. I may use light troops and sturdy cavalry to attack him at an empty spot. I may use strong crossbows and archers to seize one of his key positions. I attack him left and right. I surprise him in front and rear. By day, I confuse him with flags. By night, I confuse him with beacons and drums. So my opponent is filled with fear, divides his forces in order to defend himself. I know his dispositions, but he does not know mine. I am united. He is divided. I am sure of victory.
The place I intend to attack must not be known. If it is unknown, the enemy will have to reinforce many places. The enemy will reinforce many places, but I shall attack few.
Giles. General Philip Henry Sheridan, 1831–88, once explained the reason for General Grant's, 1822–85, victories by saying that, quote, while his opponents were kept fully employed wondering what he was going to do, he was thinking most of what he was going to do himself. End quote. Zhang Yu. He will have no idea where my chariots will actually go out to, or where my cavalry will actually come from, or where my infantry will actually proceed to, and therefore he will disperse and divide in order to defend himself everywhere against me. Consequently, his force will be scattered and weakened, and his strength divided and dissipated, and wherever I engage him, I can use a large host against his isolated units.
By reinforcing his vanguard, he weakens his rear. By reinforcing his rear, he weakens his vanguard. By reinforcing his right flank, he weakens his left. By reinforcing his left, he weakens his right. By reinforcing every part, he weakens every part.
Translator. Giles quotes from Frederick the Great's instructions to his generals. A defensive war is apt to betray us into frequent detachment. Those generals who have had but little experience attempt to protect every point, while those who are better acquainted with their profession, having only the capital object in view, guard against a decisive blow and acquiesce in smaller misfortunes to avoid greater.
Weakness stems from preparing against attack. Strength stems from obliging the enemy to prepare against an attack.
Translator. Giles quotes Colonel Henderson, George Francis Robert Henderson, instructor in tactics, military law, and administration at the Royal Military College, Sandhurst, author of The Science of War, posthumous 1905. Quote, "The highest generalship is to compel the enemy to disperse his army and then to concentrate superior force against each fraction in turn." End quote.
If we know the place and the day of the battle, then we can engage even after a march of hundreds of miles.
Du Yo. The skillful warrior must know where and when a battle will be fought. He must measure the roads to be traveled and fix the date of the encounter. He must divide his army and march in separate columns. Those who are distant start first. Those who are closer start later. Thus, troops setting out from distances of several hundreds of miles converge at the same time, like a throng converging on a city market. Du Mu. Emperor Wu of the Liu Sung dynasty, Liu Yu, founding emperor of the short-lived dynasty, who disposed of the last emperor of the previous Jin dynasty and reigned for 2 years until his own death in 422, sent Zhu Lingxi to attack Chaozhong in Tzu, the western region nowadays known as Sichuan. "Last year," said the emperor, "Liu Jingxuan set out from within the Yangtze toward Huangwu. He returned, having failed in his mission. The rebels would normally expect me to come from outside the Yangtze, but will imagine that this time I will try to take them by surprise by attacking from within the river again, in which case they will certainly defend the city of Fucheng with a strong force and guard the roads in the interior. So if I proceed toward Huangwu, I will fall straight into their trap. Instead, I will take the main force outside the Yangtze and take the city of Chengdu, thus distracting their troops toward the region within the river. This is my indirect tactic for controlling the enemy." But the emperor was concerned that this plan of his would become known to the enemy, and that the rebels would thereby know his weakness and strength, where his empty and full points were. So he gave General Zhu a sealed letter with instructions to open it only when he had reached White Emperor City along the Yangtze. Thus, when it set off, the army did not know where or how it was going to be divided. When General Zhu reached White Emperor City, he opened the letter and read, "The main force is to take the city of Chengdu from outside the river. Zhang Xi and Zhu Lin will take Guanhan from the Central River Road. The weakest troops will be dispatched from within the river on 10 tall boats toward Huangwu." Sure enough, Chao Tsung was defending the region within the river with a strong force, and General Zhu destroyed him. Giles. What Master Sun evidently has in mind is that nice calculation of distances and that masterly employment of strategy which enable a general to divide his army for the purpose of a long and rapid march, and afterwards to effect a junction at precisely the right spot and the right hour in order to confront the enemy in overwhelming strength. Among many such successful junctions which military history records, one of the most dramatic and decisive was the appearance of Blücher just at the critical moment on the field of Waterloo.
But if neither day nor place is known, then left cannot help right, right cannot help left, vanguard cannot help rear, rear cannot help vanguard. It is still worse if the troops are separated by a dozen miles, or even by a mile or two.
Zhang Yu. If we do not know the place where our enemy plans to assemble his forces or the day on which they will join battle, our unity will be dissipated through our preparations for defense, and the positions we hold will be insecure. Then, if we suddenly encounter a powerful enemy, we shall engage battle in a flurried condition, and no mutual support will be possible among wings, vanguard, or rear, especially if there is any great distance between the front and rear divisions of the army. Giles. The mental picture we are required to draw is probably that of an army advancing towards a given rendezvous in separate columns, each of which has orders to be there on a fixed date. If the general allows the various detachments to proceed at haphazard without precise instructions as to the time and place of meeting, the enemy will be able to annihilate the army in detail. Translator. More than one modern commentator has observed that one of the best recent examples of this, letting neither day nor place be known, was the Normandy landings, whose success was due in no small part to the fact that the Germans knew neither the day nor the place.
According to my assessment, the troops of Yue are many, but that will avail them little in the struggle. So I say, victory is still possible.
Giles. Master Sun was in the service of the ancient state of Wu. The state of Yu coincided roughly with the present province of Zhejiang. Alas for these brave words! The long feud between the two states ended in 473 BC with the total defeat of Wu by Gu Jian and its incorporation into Gu's kingdom of Yu.
The enemy may be many, but we can prevent an engagement.
Jia Lin. The enemy may be many in number, but if he does not know our military circumstances, we can always keep him busy with his own preparations so that he has no time to plan for an engagement. Zhang Yu. Divide them and dissipate their strength so that they cannot assemble their force in advance. Then, how can they possibly engage us?
Scrutinize him. Know the flaws in his plans. Rouse him. Discover the springs of his actions.
Zhang Yu. Eventually, by noting the enemy's joy or anger, we can conclude what his policy is. Zhu Zhiliang did this by sending the insulting present of a woman's headdress to the enemy general Sima Yi. But Sima, despite his anger, still refused to engage battle because his emperor commanded him to stand firm. See The Three Kingdoms, chapters 103-4.
Make his form visible. Discover his grounds of death and life. Probe him. Know his strengths and weaknesses. The highest skill in forming dispositions is to be without form. Formlessness is proof against the prying of the subtlest spy and the machinations of the wisest brain.
The Book of Master Zhuang, Chapter 6, The Great and Venerable Teacher. The way has its reality and its signs, but has neither action nor form. You can hand it down, but you cannot receive it. You can get it, but you cannot see it. Compare Watson, page 81.
Exploit the enemy's dispositions to attain victory. This the common man cannot know. He understands the forms, the dispositions of my victory, but not how I created the forms of victory.
Giles. Everybody can see superficially how a battle is won. What they cannot see is the long series of plans and combinations which has preceded the battle. Translator. Jean Lévy, page 195, points out that the Taoist book of Master Huinan circa 140 BC, returns again and again to this underlying paradox that the supreme form of military forms or dispositions is to present no form.
Victorious campaigns are unrepeatable. They take form in response to the infinite varieties of circumstance.
Wang Shi. There is only one basic principle underlying victory, but the forms and dispositions leading to it are infinite. Translator. Compare Wang Shi's comment with Giles' quotation from Colonel Henderson's The Science of War. Quote, "The rules of strategy are few and simple. They may be learned in a week. But such knowledge will no more teach a man to lead an army like Napoleon than the knowledge of grammar will teach him to write like Gibbon." End quote.
Military dispositions take form like water. Water shuns the high and hastens to the low.
The Way and Its Power, Chapter 8. The highest excellence is like water. Water profits the whole of creation, but it never contends. The Way and Its Power, Chapter 78. Nothing in the world is as soft and yielding as water, but when it attacks something hard, nothing can surpass it. Translator. Jean Lévy, page 196, draws attention to the way in which Master Sun defends a feminine conception of war, the strength inherent in weakness. He echoes the Way and Its Power in showing that war is not a matter of force and heroism, but of ruse and humility.
War shuns the strong and attacks the weak.
Giles. Like water, it takes the line of least resistance. Translator. It is frequently remarked that the secret of the Viet Cong's success was their mastery of this maxim, and Mao and his forces had an almost uncanny ability to determine points of nationalist weakness, which permitted them to exploit these qualities and led inevitably to an accelerating disintegration of the nationalist position. Griffith, page 55.
Water shapes its current from the lie of the land. The warrior shapes his victory from the dynamic of the enemy.
Li Chuan. How else but from the enemy's dynamic can I fashion victory? Du Mu. From the enemy's emptiness, weakness.
War has no constant dynamic.
Mei Yao Chern. Its energy evolves in response to the enemy.
Water has no constant form.
Mei Yao Chern. Its form evolves from the land. Translator. Quote, "Of itself, water has no form. It is constantly conforming. It evolves through adaptation. It is because it always adapts that it always progresses. In the same way, it is only by adapting to the enemy's situation that I can triumph. The enemy's situation is for me as the lie of land is for the water. I mold myself upon the enemy's situation. I espouse him rather than thwarting him. I never stiffen into any form, but instead I conform. As a result, victory is irresistible, irreversible, like water in its course, never going astray, always flowing downward without a moment's hesitation." End quote. Translated from Julien, page 205, who is skillfully restating the Chinese commentators, as he so often does.
Supreme military skill lies in deriving victory from the changing circumstances of the enemy.
Du Mu. In war, the potential energy emerges from the enemy's circumstances. It does not depend on us, so it is not constant. It is like water which takes its form from the land. The form does not lie in the water. It is not a constant. By responding to the downward slope of the land, water can carry boulders downstream. By responding to the enemy's circumstances, the warrior is able to change and adapt to a supreme degree.
Among the 5 elements, there is no one constant supremacy.
Translator. As Wu Julang, 1990, page 105, comments, quote, The ancient Chinese considered these 5 elements or phases, earth, water, fire, metal, and wood, to be the basis of the organization of all matter. According to the 5-element school of the Warring States period, they produce one another and control one another. What Master Sun is saying is that the permutations involved in this complex natural process are as subtle and unfathomable as those involved in the field of military strategy.
The 4 seasons have no fixed station.
Wang Shi. They revolve, one taking the place of the other.
There are long days and short. The moon waxes and it wanes.
Wang Shi. Like the changes, the perpetually shifting and flexible improvisations of the warrior adept, there is no single unchanging way.
This book is continued on Disc 6.